So you have $50,000 burning a hole in your pocket, and you're faced with a choice. Do I put a down payment on my first home, or do I fulfill that lifelong dream of quitting my job and traveling the world for a year? Now, convention tells you that you're supposed to save up and you're supposed to put a down payment on a house. But is that the right move for you right now? You know that I can't answer that for you personally, but I can help you reason it through. Let's break it down by what I think would be the biggest considerations: time, money, and lifestyle. But time first, because time is the one thing that you can't really change and you can't get it back. Let's use that $50,000 number that I mentioned earlier. I think it'll just keep things kind of neat. And everyone's numbers are a little bit different, and I have no way of knowing how long it personally took you to save $50,000. So I'm just gonna speak to averages, all right? The average American saved $5,011 in 2022. If you saved about $5,000 every year uninvested, it would take upwards of a decade to resave that $50,000. So that's the time it could take to replace the money, whichever route you decided to go. Now let's look at the home buying process. $50,000, let's be real, that's not typically enough to buy a home outright. So let's assume that this is the amount that you're gonna be using for the down payment on a mortgage. Getting from pre-approval to closing varies on a ton of different factors, but generally speaking, you can assume at least a few months on the lower end, but it could go much, much higher. It took my best friend over 18 months to find a place that he was really happy with, which is probably on the extreme end, but it is a reality in some markets. As far as traveling the world, you'd have a lot more say in the time commitment. Most countries will allow you to stay for at least 30 days without a visa, though this can vary from country to country. So you could stay in each city or country for as long as you want, as long as your budget and the local visa rules allow it. And this gives you freedom to build out the year in the way that you personally want, staying longer or shorter based on your own preferences, which gives some cool timing flexibility. But for the purposes of this comparison, we're assuming that you're not working at all for the year and you're only living off of savings. So once you get back and are ready to settle down again, you'd need time to find employment, which is not as easy to control. Right now, the average time it takes to find a job is about 5 months, though that amount can of course fluctuate. So you might want to just take this into consideration when you're planning to travel abroad. You want to make sure that your budget has enough left over to cover you making ends meet until you find a new job. So I think the takeaway with time is that you're a little bit more in control with how your time is spent with traveling. It may, however, take you additional time after the year to find work and get back into a normal financial groove. With home buying, a lot of the time involved is not directly within your power, but in most cases, you can find and move into your new home in under a year. All right. This feels like a good spot to transition over to money talk, because obviously this is a primary consideration when you're making a decision like this. If you want to travel on a tight budget and are okay staying in hostels or camping and just being generally tighter about your spending, you could realistically travel the world for a year for under $30,000. You'd also need to keep in mind normal budget travel hacks like timing your travel for off-or-shoulder seasons in varying countries, avoiding staying in the most popular areas of a city, and using your travel rewards cards strategically. But maybe you want slightly looser purse strings for the year. This would likely put you closer to that $50,000 mark, but it would free you up a bit more to splurge on cool restaurants, tours, or hotels. And you could really take your own preferences into consideration to build an itinerary into the budget that makes sense for you. Maybe you don't mind the middle seat. I mean, it couldn't be me, y'all, but maybe you don't mind. Or maybe you don't want to check bags. Maybe you're okay going bare bones with your air travel if it means you can do excursions or tours in some of your stops. Maybe you have family or friends abroad that you don't mind couch surfing with, which would give you savings that you can put into a swanky hotel at your next stop. You do have some flexibility to adjust things to suit your preferences a bit. Airfare and lodging are usually thought of as the biggest expenses when you're traveling, but you'll also need to cover, your ground transportation costs, check bags, entertainment, expenses, food, and vaccines. And then there are other costs that aren't necessarily travel related, but lean more towards just your everyday living expenses and not having a permanent home. Think like your toiletries. I mean, inevitably, you're gonna forget to take something out of your carry-on, and you're gonna have to toss it at security and replace it later. Your phone bill will probably increase since you're gonna need to add an international plan now. Not having employer-covered health insurance would mean that these medical expenses would now be out-of-pocket costs. And then it's also worth thinking about travel insurance, which would cover accidental death and dismemberment. It would cover baggage delay or loss, emergency medical coverage and evacuation, trip cancellation, delay or interruption, and a lot more. So once you consider those things, you would need to set yourself a budget just to ensure that you can make it all the way through the year financially. All right, now let's pivot over to home buying. Now, while last year the median first-time homebuyer down payment was 6% of purchase price, I'm going to use 3% because this is typically the lowest amount that you can put down on a conventional loan. Obviously, your pre-approval from a lender will determine how much home you can qualify for based on your credit, your debt-to-income ratio, and your income. But like I mentioned before, we're gonna work with averages. The average US home sale price in 2022 was $457,475. So if you consider the minimum 3% down payment on that home price, you'd be looking at $13,724. Now we have to factor in closing costs, which are 2 to 6% of the loan amount. So if you consider that 3% down payment and 2 to 6% in closing costs, you'd be looking at somewhere between $22,599 and $40,349. And then aside from those costs, there are other expenses that can immediately come with buying a new home. You'll need to hire movers with costs ranging from $900 to $2,500 if you're moving in town, and over $6,000 if you're moving long distance. And then you may also need to get furnishings for the new place. It's also a good idea to have an emergency repair fund for potential immediate home repair needs. All these things combined can easily put you at that $50,000 mark or more, particularly if you want to pay your down payment closer to that 6% down that I mentioned earlier. All right, I know I just threw a lot of numbers at you relatively quickly, but realistically, taking out a mortgage is a big liability. But I do want to remind you that having a home is an asset. Ideally, it'll appreciate or grow in value over time. So while you don't have the control over how the bulk of your funds are used that you might have when you travel, you would get a tangible asset at the end of the home buying process. And talking about tangible assets kind of makes me think that now is a good time to shift over to lifestyle considerations, which is the third thing on our list. Because if you do eventually pay off your mortgage, you won't have that monthly expense to contend with anymore. And for a lot of people, that's appealing. If you're paying $3,000 in rent right now, and that amount eventually shifts over to being what you pay towards your mortgage, the idea of not having to put out that chunk of change monthly somewhere down the road is definitely a pleasant one, right? Plus, how good would it feel to paint your space however you like, remove a wall, carpeting, or other features in the space that don't suit you, and just fully make the space your own? And having the stability of a home might make it easier to plan your finances out, allowing you to invest more easily for your retirement. But with that comes the ongoing expenses of home ownership. You'll have insurance to pay, repairs and maintenance to deal with, property taxes, just to name a few. It's also tougher to pick up and move if a career shift or other big life change causes you to move out of the area. Selling your home is typically not as quick and easy as ending a lease on an apartment. You might opt out of selling your home and lease it out instead, but then you're a landlord and you have to deal with the tenant and property management responsibilities that come along with being a landlord. Owning a home in many ways anchors you in a way that travel does not. If you don't own and you're in a town that doesn't suit you, you can pick up and leave just as quickly as you can book a flight. And with travel, you'll be experiencing new places, new cultures, and have experiences that you might not get to have if you stay in your hometown. There are also other realities that are a bit more subjective and depend more on you and your mentality going into this. Will not working for a year leave you feeling woohoo, carefree and open to personal growth? Or will it leave you feeling super stressed out about the next chapter and how you're gonna regain your financial footing? When you're thinking about your life and how you want it to go, I'd ask you, would you prefer to focus on future stability now or later? If a year of doing what you want without a ton of responsibility and a willingness to trade off investing towards future financial goals seems okay for you, then travel could be an amazing choice. If building your asset portfolio and having some stability sounds appealing and you're willing to forego some freedom and travel experiences to get it, then buying your first home might be the play. Whatever you decide, remember that it doesn't have to be the end-all be-all. You can own a home and still travel a bit throughout the year, and taking a year off doesn't mean you can never own a home or can't still work freelance or take on remote roles while you travel. Decide what you want for your life and build a plan from there that makes the most sense for you. What did you settle on? Travel for a year? Buy a house. Either way, do a search here on the NerdWallet channel for videos relevant to your decision. We can help you plan that cool trip or get started on the home buying process. You know my fellow nerds and I have you covered. Bye.